Adult Education Committee. This is my superstar, Sarah Weinberg, a fabulous Adult Education Committee member, and we're excited to be working and sharing, not working, having fun with the Federation and continuing to partner on all the great programs that we've had. And it's really been a pleasure, so thank you. I have a couple of things to say, very short, so we can get on with the program. But before I say them, I'm teaching a mindfulness meditation class at the temple, right where you're sitting. And one of the people in the class, we were discussing how you can increase your awareness and your being there, being present. And one woman said, I went out for a walk yesterday with my dog, and I didn't take my cell phone. And it was a fabulous experience. Now, you could come to my classes, and we could spend a lot of time on mindfulness. That's not my point. My point is, how about you take out your cell phones, silence it, or turn it off, and you will have a much better experience, as will everybody else. So if you are a visitor here through the double doors, our restrooms, as you're going out, don't go out, stop at our fabulous gift shop. We've got 30% off books and all kinds of wonderful things that you owe yourself to buy. At the end of the program, Sarah and I will be right there. So if you have any questions about Temple Emmanuel, which we are very proud of and very happy to be members of, we'll be glad to chat with you about them. So enjoy the program, and we're out of here.
And now you're stuck with me. My name is Jeremy. I'm Cultural Arts Manager for the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. And I welcome you here tonight. And I thank Judith for her introduction for Temple Emmanuel. And I appreciate their partnership in our author series. It's really been wonderful to work with them. So I am thrilled to introduce and welcome Shaunna Edwards and Alyson Richman, author of The Thread Collectors. But first, I have the privilege to thank our sponsors and share a bit about Federation. Simply stated, the Federation could not exist and do not do the good work we do locally and around the world without the support of generous community members. Many of you are looking at right now, by the way. And the following sponsors of the People of Book series we want to thank: Lori and David Leiner, Marcia Eisenberg, Phil Rosenbaum and Barbara Kaufman, Lisa and Bill Littman, Roberta and Carl Schaefer, Jack and Adria Sukin, and of course Debbie Yonker. I would also like to acknowledge the members of our King Solomon Society and the King David Society, whose annual investment in the Federation enables the breadth of our overall impact, including the ability to deliver programs just like this. We have many upcoming events. The flyers are all in the lobby. We have the Jewish Film Festival, the Chef Night, the Comedian Night. Name it, we got it. If you have any questions, please feel free. Trudy and I will be out there as you're purchasing your books and having the author sign them. We'll be available to answer any questions, and we appreciate it. So now I will introduce my cohort in crime, Chair of People of the Book, Helene Davis.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. Once again, I've said it multiple times, but I am very blessed and honored to be the chairperson of People of the Book. It's an extraordinary program and very special for me. Our mission at the Jewish Federation is to connect Jews with each other, to help those in need, and to promote support for Israel. In keeping with our mission, I would like to tell you about the Jewish Federation's local granting committee. Our federation has invested $18,435 in 10 community organizations whose work aligns with our strategic goals. Recipients include multiple synagogues and Chabads, Hershel Schiff Community Day School, Lakewood Ranch Jewish Club, National Council of Jewish Women, and Sarasota Jewish Chorale. These grants will support projects that bring our community together to celebrate Purim, Passover, and Shavuot, provide food for homebound elderly, offer opportunities to engage and connect through live musical performances, and enhance Jewish and Holocaust educational experiences for children and adults. If you would like to deepen your understanding of what all we do, or learn about ways you can personally engage in our work, I'd like to suggest the following 3 options. Many of you have heard these before, but you know practice makes perfect, so hopefully you'll really take them to heart. Sign up for our monthly newspaper, the Jewish News, as well as our weekly email. Volunteer or make a gift. Please see Trudy or Jeremy before you leave tonight. And I can just tell you from personal experience, I've never had a more fulfilling, validating, exciting experience than working as a volunteer for people of the Muslim. Okay, it is now time for tonight's special guests, and I've had the pleasure of meeting them a little bit earlier, and they are really special. Let's start with Shaunna. Shaunna, raise your hand so we know who you are. Has a BA in Literature from Harvard College and a JD from NYU School of Law. A former corporate lawyer, she now works in HR and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is a native Louisianian, raised in New Orleans, and currently lives in Harlem with her husband. The Fred Correctors is her first novel. Find her on Instagram at Shaunna J. Edwards. And now we go to Alyson. Alyson is the U.S. Today and #1 international best-selling author of several historical novels, including The Velvet Hours, Garden of Letters, and The Lost Wife, which is currently in development for a major motion picture. Congratulations, Alyson. Wow. Alyson graduated from Wellesley College with a degree in art history and Japanese studies. She is an accomplished painter, and her novels combine her deep love of art, historical research, and travel. Alyson's novels have been published in 25 languages and have reached bestseller lists both in the United States and abroad. She lives in Long Island with her husband and 2 children, whereas she is currently at work on her next novel. Find her on Instagram. It's Alyson Richman, at Alyson Richman. There will be an opportunity to ask questions after Shaunna and Alyson's presentation. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Shaunna Edwards and Alyson Richman.
All right, can everyone hear us? Okay, well. So many of you have, first of all, thank you to the Federation for bringing us here. So many of you have walked up to us and said, I love the Thread Collectors, or my book club has read it, and I want to let you all know we appreciate all the support, but also we're going to be fair to the people out here who might not have read the book. We're going to tell you about our collaboration, our inspiration, our writing process, but we promise no spoilers, so that's the first thing. And I think that's really important. So for those of you who have not read the book, and we hope that there won't be anyone who hasn't read the book by, a couple of months from now, in the Thread Collectors you meet 2 couples. There is a black couple, Stella. Stella is enslaved, and she is living in New Orleans. And not to put too fine a point on it, Stella is living in sexual bondage with a man she does not want to be with. She's secretly making these covert mats out of repurposed cloth and thread to help enslaved men run to join the Union Army. She's in love with William. William is a brilliant black musician. She's not free to be with him openly, but they are in love. William decides that he's going to flee too. He's going to join the Union Army. On the battlefield, he meets Jacob Klein. Jacob is a German Jewish soldier, also a brilliant musician, and their shared love of music really cements their friendship. Jacob has been encouraged to join the Union Army by his fiery abolitionist wife, Lily, who's described to look a lot like Alyson in the book. And Lily is encouraging Jacob. She's sending down these letters. She's also joined her own quilting circle. She's not much of a sewer, but she is creating quilts, and she's sending them to Jacob for comfort and she's also selling them to fund the Union cause. But it's really the friendship between these two men, these two musicians on the battlefield, William and Jacob, that opens up the characters and really tells us how their lives will intertwine. So with that.
So one of the things that people usually want to know when they see this dynamic duo on stage is, well, how did the two of you meet and how did this friendship form? So we love to share that with you. Shaunna and I have been friends for over a decade. I like to say we met in one of the most unlikely of places, though Shaunna likes to wink.
It wasn't that unlikely.
It was Las Vegas. So it was over 10 years ago. I had 2 children under the age of 5. I had not been on a vacation since I had my second child. And my husband came home from work. He's a corporate attorney. And he said that he was invited to an all-expense paid vacation in Las Vegas where they were going to put us up in the Four Seasons and I could even get a massage. And, it was Friday through Monday. And so I couldn't get to the phone quick enough to ask my mom if she would take the 2 children. So on the first night at the opening reception, I was standing on line at the bar. And I was letting every single man who was an attorney, cut in front of me because I was just happy to be dressed up without, spit up on my shoulder. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this beautiful woman come walking over who doesn't like seeing another woman in distress and being taken advantage of.
And I said, why are you letting every man cut in front of you? And by the way, I love your dress. Because it's a shame, I shouldn't, but I stand out in, a room full of corporate lawyers. But if possible, she stood out even more. She was wearing this beautiful papaya-colored dress, and she just kind of looked like a wood fairy. She was just like looking around, and I was like, what in the world? And so I said, you don't seem like a lawyer. What are you doing here? I probably said it nicer than I probably didn't. I probably had like 2 drinks. Because I had also been unceremoniously stood up by my +1, and I found out about it on my layover to Vegas. So, that was so charming. It's all right. I'm now married. I found a better person, but I'm just saying. So she said, I'm a writer. And, as Helen mentioned when she was introducing us, I majored in literature. And a lot of you are avid readers. The idea that you can be speaking to a real-life author, it's like a unicorn in front of you. I essentially demanded that we become friends. We became friends that weekend, and we now will be friends for a lifetime. But the beauty of our friendship was that I could always talk about books with Alyson. Ask her what she's reading. I can talk about what I'm reading. We would share books. Sometimes I was even able to drag her to my book club. And if you want to win book club, you bring the author. Like, there's nothing that's better. I don't care what someone she could reward is like. And for us, much like William and Jacob's, friendship is about music, our friendship was about books. It was about that love of literature.
Yeah, so absolutely our friendship was cemented in our love of novels and good literature. But one of the other things that I loved about Shaunna instantly was that she was always curious about what I was working on next. And so she became that friend of mine that, whenever we would meet, she'd say, what are you working on? And she was like a litmus test. If I had a small seed of an idea that wasn't fully formed, I could say, I'm thinking about maybe writing on this. What do you think? So flash forward to 2017. Shaunna at that time, I think, was living in D.C. She wrote to me that she was coming up to New York. We were going to get a bite to eat and have a drink and some laughs. And right away she said, well, what are you working on? Do you have any ideas for your next book? And I said, well, I have had this idea in the back of my mind for a really long time that I might want to write a Civil War novel. Growing up, my grandmother had always shared with me this story that on our family line, on her maternal side, my relatives came over from Baden, Germany in 1833, and I had 2 great uncles, according to my grandmother, who in the late 1850s, one of the older brothers went down to a very small town in Satartia, Mississippi, which is part of Yazoo County, and he started a small mercantile depot that grew into an emporium, a pretty substantial emporium. But up north, his younger brother Jacob stayed with the family business. And when the war broke out, the southern uncle joined the Confederacy, and the northern uncle joined the Union Army. And that decision by the brothers' parts permanently divided the family forever. And my grandmother would say, my mother used to tell me that the southern side of the family, they're actually not Jewish anymore, they're all Baptist. And she would sort of giggle But me, someone who was always interested in stories and, family lore, was always like, what do you mean they're Baptists? And, Mississippi, it just seemed so incredibly exotic. So I said to Shaunna,
That's the first time anyone's described Yazoo County, Mississippi as exotic.
So I went on to say, Shaunna, so I have a story in my family history, and I thought that it would be sort of interesting to mine this fraternal divide between two brothers who parents were actually immigrants themselves to a new country, who are outsiders themselves, and that take this conflicting, decision on the Civil War. But on top of that, I had also just seen, like a week or two before I saw Shaunna, Rick Burns, Ken Burns' younger brother, had done a documentary for PBS called Death in the Civil War. And in that particular documentary, it has a lot of information about, the burial of the Civil War dead and all those things that the government had to initiate during the time of the war to be able to get the bodies back home. But one of the things that I found particularly interesting that I wasn't aware of was that 180,000 black men enlisted to fight for freedom during the Civil War. But instead of being given instead of being given muskets to fight, they were given pickaxes and hoes and forced to do all sorts of demeaning manual labor, such as digging latrines, trenches, and also burying the Civil War dead, which were the white soldiers. And on top of that, the documentary went on to highlight that there were these maps being created by soldiers that when their fellow compatriots died or were buried hastily, they made these maps on scraps of pieces of paper on the backs of their, diaries, their journals, scraps of paper, hoping that after the war ended, if they could, basically create a map where their friends had been buried, they could give that to the family members of the fallen soldiers so the bodies could be brought back up north and buried properly. So I said to Shaunna, so I have all these different ideas, but I'd love to blend them into a story where perhaps there's an unexpected friendship between a black soldier and a white Jewish soldier on the battlefield, and then a map is created by the black soldier, and somehow that map gets back up north to his beloved. And Shaunna was like...
Well, I thought it was a really intriguing idea. Growing up in Louisiana, maybe just growing up in the South, the Civil War feels more present. Like I would regularly travel around Robert E. Lee Circle, so I've always been fascinated by the Civil War. Of course, I latched on to the idea of this black character. I wanted to know his motivations, his backstory, what's going on for him, but also the way we had been talking about the soldier. Free black people did fight in the Civil War. They fought on the Union side, and in fact, in the beginning, some of them even fought on the Confederate side. But the way we were talking about the soldier, he probably would have been enslaved. And enslaved people were not taught how to read and write. In fact, if a white person was caught teaching an enslaved person how to read and write, they could face dire consequences as well. So my mind was like, well, what is this map going to be like? It's not a traditional map. It's not like turn left at the creek, because the soldier wouldn't have had those language skills. So I said, well, what if he gives this map, whatever form it takes, to his beloved, and she creates something tactile with thread, and she sews a map. And I would not have been able to tell you then why this popped in my head. Like Alyson and I think we know each other now well enough, even creatively, to know things just came through. But I think it comes from the fact that I am not a quilt maker. I am not an embroiderer. I know there's at least one embroiderer in here. I am not professing to have any of those skills. But I do come from a line of women where my grandmother made quilts and my great-grandmother made quilts, and my mother was born on a cotton farm in a town called Houston, Louisiana. Do not look it up. It has 387 people there. But, they didn't have much, but they did have this art of taking the remnants that you had and creating something utilitarian for warmth and something that turned out to be quite beautiful. So I've grown up surrounded by this idea of cloth and thread being able to be used for different things. So I said to Alyson, what about this sewn map?
So right away, I was really sort of blown away with the idea, and I could imagine this visual artifact of this map that you could touch, that could be held in your hand, and that would be far more durable than the map that I had been thinking, which was on a flimsy piece of writing paper. And so that was amazing, but also Shaunna instantly opened up the possibility of a love story, right, by talking about the beloved who creates this map. So I left that afternoon with Shaunna very much inspired, but I wasn't yet ready to write the book. And when I look back at it now, I kind of feel that it was, sometimes when I discuss my other books and I say there's something in the air and in the wind behind my back that always kind of steers me to say this is the book that you need to be writing at this moment. Because really, truly, I have usually 2 or 3 ideas of different books in my mind at different times. So something made me pause and think it wasn't the right time to begin this Civil War novel. I went on to write another book called The Secret of Clouds. Fast forward to 2020, and when we were in the throes of the pandemic, it was the spring, and it was also a time where the world seemed not only fragile and scary with COVID, but we had also all witnessed the brutal murder of George Floyd. And I think, for me personally, I felt so, I just felt so broken and sad, and I felt like the parallels of this divisiveness in this country, I just felt that the parallels of the Civil War started to feel very apparent for me, and I kept on thinking back to that time of history and wanting to sort of understand and learn from what happened. I also wanted to somehow find hope in the darkness. I mean, we were all sheltering in place. It just seemed like an incredibly dark time. So as my mind kept on returning to the idea of writing this Civil War book that had been in my mind for several years at this point, I started to remember the conversation I had with Shaunna. And what was unique about this conversation with Shaunna, it wasn't like in the past or with other friends when I said I had an idea and they said, oh, I really think that sounds great, you should do it. From the moment I shared it with Shaunna, she started building story with me. She started contributing to it, she started layering it, and it just felt like at this point it was as much what she had conceived as I had originally conceived. So I reached out to Shaunna, not knowing if she'd be interested, but I also knew that she loved to read. I knew she was a fantastic writer. She's, you look at her, she's brilliant and sparkling. So I thought maybe she might want to collaborate with me. So I called her on the telephone and I said, remember that conversation?
I said, yes, I did. I thought she was crazy. I really did. I mean, in more flippant moments, I've described it as, so your white girlfriend calls you up in the middle of a race war and says, hey, you want to write a book about race? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, no. I want to keep drinking Miss Makers. So, but really it was much more lovely than that. I didn't know if I could do it because to be a historical novelist, and now that I've been on this amazing journey, but I know from having read Alyson's other wonderful books, the level of detail that goes into it to make sure that it's factually accurate and that you're educating people and not, spreading misperceptions, you have to live in that. And I felt like I was living the most racially divisive time of my life, I hope, not would, and this would require me to basically live intellectually in the most racially divisive time of our country, not would, I hope. And I didn't know if I had that available. I just didn't know. I think every day I kind of almost felt like I vacillated between numbness and my skin being on fire. So I consulted people in my life that I really care about. I think everyone has that kitchen cabinet, the people you go to. And it was really my husband who put it differently to me. He said, I hear you speaking a lot about what this project, which was admittedly a dream, right? I've always wanted to write a novel. But I hear you speaking about what this project will take from you, what it will require from you, but I would just invite you to think about what you could gain from it. You've been talking about how, in spite of the fact that you're doing the work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're feeling hopeless. This might be a place where you can find some healing, where you can feel productive. And that for me, it felt a little challenging, but it was enough where I felt I could tell Alyson I would try. I was hesitant. I'd never want to present myself as braver about writing a book about slavery during these times than I was. I said I would try.
So I wanted to respect that. I also wanted to find a way that Shaunna would feel comfortable trying to see if we could write the novel. And so we decided that it was important for us to meet in person, just to sort of feel each other's energy and intention. And with it being COVID, it was sort of, it was scary, but I was like, I will come to New York City. It was the first time I took the Long Island Railroad. I was all masked up. And the first day, it does feel sort of like it was an auspicious sign that Shaunna could actually meet me was Juneteenth. So there was a lot of signs that I think that the fact that I met her in the way that I did, it was sort of divine. But anyway, I'm not gonna cry. So we decided to meet at Bryant Park, which is right behind the New York Public Library. And we sat 6 feet apart. Shaunna's mother had told her that morning.
On Juneteenth, Black Dallas Day in Black Home, so I did not eat or drink a thing over 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, and I didn't either because I wanted to be,
An ally.
an ally. So I didn't either. And we started dreaming about, well, if we were to write this book, who were the characters we're going to be? What were our intentions? And so from that first moment, we decided that we wanted to honor our ancestors, pull from our family histories, to make something that was going to be historically accurate, that was going to go into the darkness of what the time of the Civil War was like with slavery. But we were also going to try and bridge a divide, to find those rays of light, that by the time you got to the last page of whatever we ended up creating, it was going to fill you with some sense of hope. That was definitely our intention. So I said to Shaunna, one of the really important things for me is that I do know that my uncle up north was a musician in the Union Army, and I would love to use his name, and I would love to make sure that he's a musician in the book.
And I said, that's great, because then we can make the Black hero, William, that's also a family name for me, he can spend some of his adulthood in New Orleans. Not only do I know a lot about New Orleans, because I'm from there, but it happens to be the most musical city in the United States. Don't fight me because of Chicago. Sometimes Chicago people try to fight about. You got 2 good jazz clubs and you fight them. So I place for William to spend time. There was also another reason, though, I thought that New Orleans could be an important part of the action. Not only was it very important just logistically in the Civil War from a military standpoint, but I knew New Orleans to be, even in the 1860s, a very multicultural place. There were enslaved Black people, there were free Black people, which we have some characters in our book. There were obviously white people, there were Europeans, Native Americans. There was also a small, thriving Jewish community as well, so I thought it would be a great backdrop. But when we talk about our family history and wanting to bring something to bear, I also know that New Orleans, like a lot of other places in the United States, suffered then and still suffers from colorism. And colorism is just our preference from our society and our education for people with lighter skin. Before Louisiana was purchased by the United States in 1803, there was a code, a set of laws called the Code Noir. And it actually regulated the rights that Black people had depending on their degree of whiteness. So if you were a mulatto, we don't use that term anymore, half Black, half white, like Stella, our heroine, you had some, rights. If you were a quadroon, 1/4, all the way down to 1/32. And that colorism and that difference between the opportunities afforded to people who are darker and the opportunities that are afforded to people that are lighter, not only has it had a big impact on our country, it's had an impact on my family and me personally. I see at least one of my very good friends here, but if I held up she's met my entire family, but if I held up my 2 grandparents, those people don't look anything alike. And their fates diverged in many ways because of some of their physical adjacency to whiteness. And that was something that we wanted to bring into the book, or at least I wanted to bring into the book, and Alyson was wonderful and gracious enough to say yes to. So that's why New Orleans also resonated with me.
Yes, and so from that beginning, I think we were dreaming, we were building these characters, we were already thinking about our own families and what we wanted to pull from them. But we also like to talk about these sort of conversations that we had where we were trying to communicate that moment, and sometimes someone like me might have faltered. For example, I said to Shaunna, I was trying to show to her my intention of wanting to create something that was beautiful and powerful and meaningful and anti-racist. And I said, I was brought up to be colorblind. And in that moment in the park, Shaunna looked at me and she said, I won't be able to write this book with you unless you see my color. And she said it really beautifully. But I realized at that moment that how I heard a word, in my family that meant we treat everyone equally. In her ear, it sounded very differently. And we would sometimes have these moments when we were writing the book that one word sounded different in another person's ear. But we never got upset with each other. We always kept our hearts and our ears open because we knew we wanted to learn from each other. We knew we wanted to build something together, not separately. And I think that dovetails really nicely in how we actually wrote the book together. A lot of people come up to us before we spoke this evening and said, we really want to know how you collaborate. How do two people write a novel? Well, on that first afternoon, we decided we were not going to separate the writing. Shaunna was not going to write the black characters, and I wasn't going to just write the white characters. We wanted to create one seamless narrative voice so that when you read the Thread Collectors, you can't tell who wrote what. We felt not only was that going to be able to immerse you in the story and not have you distracted trying to figure out who wrote what chapter, but as a metaphor of blending our hearts, our mind, our heritages and faiths to create something that was unified, I think was something that we knew we wanted to do right away. So the way we went about doing that, and we decided we were going to write 40 pages together and see if we could sell it, because Shaunna does have a full-time job, and I didn't want to, bring her through the whole process of writing a book and then having no publisher, buy it from us. We decided we'd do 40 pages and a proposal and see if the agent could sell it. We did it through a Google Doc. So every Sunday we would brainstorm like that first afternoon we did in Bryant Park. I would take, a lot of notes of what Shaunna was dreaming up and what we were dreaming up together. And I like to say, there's a few artists in the room, it was like creating a wire armature. It had shape and it had form, and maybe I had put the thinnest layer of clay. But as soon as it was up, I'd let Shaunna know, and she would add her layer of clay. And then I would go back and add it. And we would go back and forth on 20 pages at a time, probably 4 or 5 times, just adding texture, color, and all these sort of visual elements until we both felt every word that we went over to make sure it sounded right in our ear was as perfect as possible.
Absolutely. And we tackled the research very similarly. We wrote this book relatively fast. First of all, we sold it, which was lovely, and then they gave us a pretty aggressive deadline, which was lovely, but then it also backed up on the end of my first attempt at a wedding, which was not so lovely. So I told Alyson, we need to really get this out because I can't spend this last 6 weeks doing this, as lovely as it was. So we knew that we had to kind of it would be all hands on deck. So I had the good fortune of being able to go and see my mother and extended family down in New Orleans and do first person research. I took advantage of the New Orleans Historical Society, the Amistad Research Center, which has made it its business to catalog the lives not only of ordinary everyday African Americans, but also those of note. And, I could walk the streets of the French Quarter, and importantly, I could go to Port Hudson. So those of you who have read the book, you know that the Battle of Port Hudson takes, it takes center stage. It's a formative moment for William and Jacob's relationship. And it's a moment, much like that moment in Bryant Park, where William really opens up to Jacob about how he's feeling as a black man fighting in the Union Army. I had never heard of Port Hudson until I stumbled upon it in my research. And I had a great education. I've been dragged on a lot of field trips. And to know that a seminal battle took place 90 minutes away from where I live, where black soldiers were so important and I had never been taught it, it felt like a gut punch. For those of you who haven't read the book or aren't aware of the Battle of Port Hudson, it's similar a bit to that beautiful, movie Glory that, highlights the bravery of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment storming Fort Wagner. We needed, the Union Army needed to win this battle, right? It was like the last stronghold of the Confederates. It was very important to control the Mississippi Delta. And if you look at everything on paper, the Union Army should have won it hands down. They had more soldiers, they had more artillery. They did not have the higher ground. The Union officers finally decided to let black men fight, but they didn't do appropriate surveillance, and they sent hundreds of them into a shooting gallery, where Confederate soldiers shot from above, and hundreds died on the first day of the battle. However, the Union officers decided that they didn't want to sacrifice good soldiers, white soldiers, going to retrieve the bodies, so the bodies laid there for weeks. And they were led by a free person of color, Lieutenant General Andre Kalu. And when they finally got his body, his body was so decomposed that they could only identify him from his signet ring. And I mean, I think most of you are people of faith. I'm sorry, I'm getting so emotional. I'm a woman of faith, and I think it says a lot about a society, not only how we treat people when they're living, but how we treat people when they are passed away. And this idea that these hundreds of men gave their lives for freedom, and then they just laid there. It I don't know. It really just it kind of destroyed me. So I called Alyson and I said, I've never heard of this, and I live right there. I think we have to put it in the book. And that kind of became our test, right? If we didn't know something and we felt we should have known it, we put it in the book. I was so embarrassed that as much as I read about the Civil War, I didn't know that Jewish soldiers were expelled from the Union Army for a time. I'm learning about anti-Semitic slurs that were used during that time because the federal government thought Jewish merchants were cheating them, that I use every day. I didn't know the etymology. I didn't know what it meant. And so we felt together, right, about each other's heritage and faith and what our people have been through. We felt we were constantly learning, and we always felt if we learned something, we needed to put it in the book. I mean, but without hitting anybody over the head with pictures. I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. I don't mean to decompensate for other people. Okay.
And if Shaunna cries, I cry, because we're one. So we're definitely in sync all the time. So what Shaunna's mentioning, that when we would discover something, when we were researching different angles of, periods of battles and what was happening in the South versus what was happening in the North, where Lily was, making, it was like the backbone. I would call, or she would call, and I said, did you know this? And we would check, did you learn this in the classroom? Because I didn't learn that. So one of the things that I learned while I was doing the research up north, I was trying to use the archives that were available from the New York Historical Society. And there was a book published under their imprint called 50 Artifacts from the Civil War. And basically they would have an artifact and then they would talk about the history in that chapter, illuminating how it came to be in their collection. And they had in their possession a charred Bible from the Colored Children's Orphanage on 42nd and 5th Avenue. It was called the Colored Orphan Asylum, but it was an orphanage. It was a beautiful structure that's just steps away from where now the New York Public Library is. It had a school, a nursery, a pasture in the backyard, yard, if you could imagine that. And it had close to 250 black children, many who were orphaned because their, father was fighting in the Union Army, something had happened to their mother. And on the day of the draft, on the week of the draft riots in 1863 in July, a mob of angry white men surrounded this orphanage, barricaded it, and tried to burn all 233 children inside. And this is New York, so I don't know about you, but when I learned history in the Northeast, the North was good, the South was bad, and it was very, very simplified. I'd never heard of any of, this horror that I was reading about. Now, the children were all shepherded out safely by a wonderful teacher who was able to get them to safety. And luckily, a small black child was pulled this Bible that she passed by every day that was close to the entranceway to the dining hall. And to this day, that is the only thing that remains of that orphanage. So I read this, completely horrified, sick to my stomach, and I called Shaunna and I said, did you ever hear of this? And so I said, well, this has to go in the book. But then we had to think as authors, well, how are we going to put this in the book so that you're going to keep on turning the next page, that you're not going to be repelled by the violence, but you're going to learn from the violence. And so we decided that when we learned something that was important, we would always find a way to, I don't mean to use a pun, but thread it somehow, that you are going to be in the lens of the particular character. And with Lily being up north, we thought letter writing was a really good way for her to use her own words of what she was witnessing living in New York at that time. So in the letters, she writes and talks about this incident. She talks about seeing a runaway enslaved person being captured on the streets and how horrified she is by this. But we were wanting to find devices so that you were going to learn but still be pulled into the story.
So we don't want to, because we know you have questions as well, and we want to talk about the things that are important to you, but maybe before we turn to questions, we wanted to show you just some pictures, either things that inspired us or things that we came across in our research. Oh, no. Okay. I'm sorry, there's technical issues. Oh, this is our fault because I think we didn't make sure that Jeremy had the slides in advance.
No, blame me. Talk to my mom.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. They weren't that good anyway. You didn't miss anything. All right. Well, with that, maybe we'll open it up to questions.
I'll take one microphone, please. I have one question. The character Teddy, and I loved about his evolution of when he found his voice. Was it on anybody in particular in your lives, either of you, or?
So if we had the slides, I would have shown you a postcard of inspired. No, but look at it. Even at that first day, thank you, Jeremy, for that question. That first day, I saw a black drummer boy in my head, and I then went home, and I have a lot of weird hobbies, but one of them is collecting sepia tone postcards with black people on them. But I had this old postcard with a young black drummer boy, maybe around 11 or so, and immediately in my mind that was Teddy. I explained to Alyson, and she was gracious. She's like, yes, that's a good idea, that I wanted to include a black child because I thought it was important to not only talk about the impact of war on childhood, but to also hopefully have a reader question who gets to have a childhood. Because the reality is, in the United States and a lot of places around the world, black children don't get to have a childhood. You know, the studies are pretty clear. Black children are over-disciplined in school. They are usually perceived as older than they are, and then the response to them is, you know, maybe inappropriate in that way. And I wanted to put in a black child that people would fall in love with, and our readers have, so they can think about black children, frankly. And Alyson and I fought very hard, our editor, who was lovely, but she was concerned about how many characters we had. And she was like, well, do we need this drummer boy? And I had almost lost it. I was like, we absolutely do. And it's been gratifying that a lot of our readers, Teddy really resonates with them. So thank you.
We've probably done like 70 events, and there hasn't been one event that someone hasn't mentioned Teddy.
Anyone have a question over here?
Yes, once you completed the research and the writing into the book, and it's been a great success from what I understand, but it is a historical fiction. And what I'm wondering is, did that give you a more pertinent insight into what the South was like then and what the South is like it is today?
Well, I'm Southern, so let's be fair. No, I'm joking.
So just so that I make sure that I understand your question, so did I feel after having done the research, did I find parallels or any differences? Like, are you just asking different? I mean, I don't have enough experience to be able to talk about the South today.
I'll take a stab at it. So, I think that the South was then and is now a complicated place. You know, it is interesting for me as a black woman who now lives in the North to be a proud Southerner. I never hide the fact that I'm from Louisiana. I do not say I'm a New Yorker. I don't try to hide the twang. I probably, if I can convince my New Jersey husband, I'll probably live below the Mason-Dixon line. But I think that that's the beauty of being an American and a Southerner if you do it right? Like, you can be prideful of a place, but also acknowledge its complexities, where we have fallen down, where we still have to get up. And for me, the research, it underscored what I had always felt growing up in the South. Of course, there is darkness, but there's also optimism, right? You know, if you can get through the Civil War and come out on the other side, and we know we might want to write a book about Reconstruction. I know there are so many challenges there. It makes you feel like we can keep pushing and we can get through the better place. But I think my perception of the South remains the same. It's a complicated place, but it's a great place.
Raise your hand if you have a question, please. Surprise, surprise.
So, I was fascinated by the thread aspect of your story. And sewing generally means repair. Embroidery generally means beautification. So how did you decide where Lily stood on the subject of sewing versus Stella? What was your thought process?
So it's a great question, and no one's ever asked that question, so thank you for it. So right away, when we were dreaming of Stella together, the idea of her ingenuity, her resourcefulness, was something that was going to be, something that permeated her entire being, that she would create beauty and also be able to repair out of almost nothing, almost like that she had this very unique ability to find the materials she needed to create, like an artist. I think it was also really important to show the language of color in her embroidery and how she learns that from Amine. Shaunna and I, early on in the research, discovered, at that point it was just an article. Tia Miles hadn't written her book, All That She Carried, that came out actually the year that we basically published our own book. But we learned about Ashley Sack. And Ashley Sack is, it's now on display in the Smithsonian, but it's part of the permanent collection of the Museum of African Diaspora.
At the National Museum of African American History and Culture in D.C.
Okay. So this particular, artifact that we learned about, that's called Ashley Sack, was a flour sack that during the time of slavery, a woman who was basically parting with her beloved daughter, knowing that she was going to be sold away into slavery, took what she had and put it into this flour sack. I'm gonna start crying. She put a lock of her hair, she put 4 pecans, she put a clean white cotton dress. She put all the things that she wanted her daughter to know, which was love and protection and what she could do before her daughter was ripped away from her. Years later, her granddaughter, the story had been passed down about what was put in the sack. But her granddaughter decided to use embroidery to put the story onto the sack. And she wrote, this sack belonged to so-and-so, it was given to Rose, and she put the 3 pecans, the clean dress, and embroidery. But every line that she wrote, she used a different color. And they believe, in the article, that the green thread was hope, that the red was love, that the yellow was, a sense of light. And so Shaunna and I discussed it, and we said we want Amine to teach the color coding to Stella. So that was right from the beginning. With Lily's sewing, that wasn't something, I'm going to be completely transparent, that was initially part of our plot. It was our editor who wanted to show the parallels between the 2 women and how they used sewing and resourcefulness as the men were fighting, what they were doing to contribute to the war effort. Now there was a funny part in the process where we had finished the book, or very close to it, and the editor wrote to our agent and said, she wants one more sewing scene with Lily. I called Shaunna and I said, Lily doesn't even like to sew, because I don't like to sew. And Shaunna was like, well, maybe put that into the chapter. Maybe have her, when Ernestine Rose, the abolitionist, telling her that she should do this sewing circle, maybe she should say, I want to be writing and I want to be out there speaking. I don't want to be sewing, but I'll do it, and what happens with her life when she starts working in this sewing circle. But it wasn't, it was Stella from the very beginning.
Next question. Somebody had their hand up. Oh, of course.
This is a question and a statement. One of the things I loved about the book and what you were just describing was that every time there was something historical, you felt it was important to include in the book. And we're living here in Florida, and we have a terrible governor, very terrible governor who does not want this kind of information and talk to everyone else. And so I was so moved by Shaunna's story, because every time I talk to my parents and have these conversations, I'm learning something every day. And there were things I just did not learn. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to a private school. They didn't teach us these things at all. And so I applaud you for continuing to educate all of us. But more importantly, I just would love to hear more about, you all have been traveling, I'm assuming, to different states. And so what has been the reception? Obviously, I'm assuming you're attracting people like us who really care and want to hear more about this, but your book would be banned if they, if it were up to certain people. So, and thank you.
Thank you. So it's funny that the day after our book was released, we did about 20 radio shows, which is lovely, and podcasts. But one of them was a guy I think I really enjoyed. I forgot where he was from. That was a Tennessee guy. And he was like, well, we can't read your book here, but it sounds really good. And I remember laughing a little bit, but also, one of the things, I go back to that fateful meeting, and we're talking about William and not being able to read and write. The way you break a people is by taking away their language, is by erasing their history. And I think that some people just have to resist. I'm not here to make a political statement, but I do have a full-time job. This is not easy for me to juggle all of these things, but I think we do it because we feel it's important. We have been privileged to have really, really great receptions with people. Alyson spoke to 150 teachers, but will those teachers be able to bring the book back into their schools? And that's a challenge, that's an uncertainty. And we know that really, really bad things start when you start to ban books.
Two more questions?
This question is not about the book, which Barbara has now told me I must read. Some years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I had the wonderful occasion to be at court dinner in New York at the Sheraton Hotel, which was run by that time by Niger Innes, the son of Roy Innes. And many of you don't know who Roy Innes was. He was the head of the Congress of Racial Equality. And they talked about the first black consul of San Francisco in 1845, who was black. His name was William Leidesdorff. I think it would be a great topic for your next book. William's Jewish family, part of them are still living here in Florida and on the East Coast, and they were honored that night for their philanthropy to CORE.
Thank you.
And you do not have to give them part of your royalty at all. One last question, thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you two for writing this book and for being here tonight. Have you, either of you in childhood or as adults, faced anti-Semitism in your personal life or racism?
Well, I think we each need
Yes, absolutely, with anti-Semitism, and I think I've experienced sort of sometimes a type of anti-Semitism where someone would say something and not realize that I was Jewish. That happens to me a lot, probably because I'm really tall. Although you're tall too, but typically, I think, sometimes people say things not realizing that I'm Jewish, and I say, I'm Jewish, and then, oh, you don't seem Jewish. That's very anti-Semitic to say, because what does it mean to seem Jewish? And then people just start burying themselves. I did grow up in a part of Long Island that had almost no Jewish people. I was the only Jewish, my parents actually sent me to a Presbyterian nursery school that was in a church because there wasn't another nursery school for me to go to, so I was the token Jewish person, and the teachers would very kindly say, tell us about Hanukkah. But by the time I went to elementary school, when sometimes, would come out that I was Jewish, I remember one time a boy calling me a dirty Jew, cheap Jew, and all sorts of things in that particular school, which was obviously very hard. And I think as I've grown up, it's so important for me in all of my books to have at least one Jewish character, because I feel that the more people read and empathize with and learn from people from all different backgrounds and faiths and cultures, and people who have read my other books, they very often take place in different countries as well. But I want to show that the bonds that connect people, the humanity, and that's what I feel is my purpose on this earth.
Well, it's hard to follow that up. If you can believe this, I went to school with way more Jewish people than Alyson did. After I went to Catholic school through 3rd grade and 4th grade, I switched to a school called Isidore Newman in New Orleans, which was founded in 1903 as a Jewish orphanage. So about 40-50% of my class was Jewish. So she was like, I was theology. I was like, no, there were a lot of Jewish people in my class. There were not a lot of Black people. I have been educated in predominantly white institutions. My parents are lovely, they are wonderful, they are proud, they have made sure that they tried to surround us with people from different organizations, friend groups that give you that sense of Blackness. But your day-to-day, when you are learning how to be a person, it really is in the educational system. And it's with your peers, and if you don't see yourself reflected, that leaves a mark. And that's everything from the more overt racism. I've probably experienced more of it in Europe or in the North, and maybe we were just talking about this. The casual, everyday racism doesn't matter about geography. That takes place everywhere. I remember the one that I was an adult, and I guess I thought that I had gotten over it. I was in Italy. I went to part of law school in Italy, and I went to a glove store with a friend. She didn't even have money to buy gloves. She was like a Canadian. I don't even know what the exchange rate was, but I had money to buy gloves. And, my parents grew up under Jim Crow. My dad was born in 1938. My mother was born in 1943. I'm not confused about the world, but I asked to try on the gloves, and the woman wouldn't let me try on the gloves. And I just, at first I thought it was my Italian. I was like, it was my Italian. And then I said it, I said it in English, and she answered me in English. She's like, we only let people try on gloves that they're going to buy. And I went around the store, and I cried my eyes out. And then I was ashamed for crying, and then I was ashamed for letting my white friends see me cry. And it was just this whole jumble of emotions. And I said, this happens to me maybe like something that horrible would only happen to me hopefully like twice in a lifetime. This happened to my parents every single day. I mean, my mother went to medical school with 2 daughters. She went to Texas Tech. She was one of the first classes that they accepted Black people. She's 4'11". She's 4'11". She's a couple of shades darker than me. She's living up in Lubbock, Texas by herself. My father's taking care of her daughters. And every day, someone's spitting on her. They're, throwing medicine back in. And it's like, we have to stop thinking of this as so far removed. Alyson and I did a podcast with a judge, a Louisiana judge, Black man, early 80s. When he grew up, he lived in the house with his great-great-grandmother who had been enslaved. He remembers his great-great-grandmother's first-person stories about having been enslaved. And I think if we can't get over our tendency or our desire to think of this as so far removed from the day-to-day experience of someone that we love, then we're never going to get anywhere. So, yeah, I still go back to Florence, but I don't go back to that glove store. It's like that scene in Pretty Woman. I was like, big mistake.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Before I give the microphone over to Judith, Shaunna, Alyson, you guys are welcome at any time. Is there a new book or what?
Well, we have an idea. We'd like to make it into a series to follow these 2 families, like into Reconstruction, and then into the 20s, Harlem Renaissance, the rise of fascism in Europe, and then into the 60s, where we know that so many Jewish people stood as allies with Black people as they were fighting for civil rights. But she's the business-headed one in this regard. She was like, we got to make people fall in love and buy this one first.
Yeah. So spread the word.
Shaunna, thank you for the segue. We've got a couple books left. While they're still here to sign your books, please take advantage. Trudy will sell them to you, and they will be there to autograph. And for the good night, here's Judith.
Wow. I almost don't know what to say, but I always say something. Thank you so much. Thank you for choosing us to have us at Temple Emmanuel, this wonderful place. You were a fascinating audience. I mean, I'm just transfixed. I read 4th of the book, and I cannot wait to read it again. So thank you for coming, and look forward to seeing some of you at the film festival, which we have coming up in April, right?
March
19th.
Okay. If you want to be a sponsor, I can take care of that right now.
Come back to Temple Emmanuel anytime. We'd love to have you. And you too. Thank you.